Look up there on that venue map. Top of the last one. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks good. What is it we're going to?
I could hold the shoulder for
Just so I can get around.
Say hi! I attack it.
Because we're going to be referring to some of these things, so it'll be easier to keep track of. Yeah, try to do it like try not to have it so every, we don't have like a ton of them, so like if you want to group or something, just try to have it like what is yeah, they're all
Classic. They're dead. Dead, slow, stupid, running, and catatonic. I don't know what that word could you go. Or they could look like demons. Or like the more intense version of Alien.
well, it has one on the map. Okay.
Classic, and then there's Predator. And if The Walking Dead had zombies like these, people would not live long.
I don't think so.
First season does not exist. It's only 3 episodes. They're cool. They're just up as a night. World examples of zombies. You must go blind.
I'm a light fly. I'm a light fly.
Yeah, that'd be great once we get started. Yeah, turn them off. Thank you.
Like a Vikings or a
Would have been cool if I could have.
just midway through Comic-Con, there's a battle between everyone who has armor. It's a person's first time at Comic-Con. They walk in, there's a person getting stabbed. Stand speed. I'm trying to think of the game. There's a game where they have like enemies that look like this. It's not Resident Evil. I don't know what it's called.
Alright, I think we're gonna get started. I'll let other people trickle in as it comes. So my name is Bryce AC, and I am a CSU PhD student at Colorado State University, and I study infectious organisms. In particular, what I do for my research is I integrate artificial intelligence and infectious diseases together. And so that's kind of my background.
And I'm Sean Cross. I'm also a PhD graduate student at Colorado State University. I work with microorganisms as well, but I actually work on viruses. And so my research is to understand how viruses might benefit us. So most times when you think of a virus, you kind of think of something that's detrimental, like you think Ebola virus or the flu, and you're like, oh, it's going to make us sick. But there's actually some evidence that viruses might actually give us some benefits. And so my research is to understand that, and I use the fruit fly, which seems kind of weird, but it's actually a really nice tool to use. There's a lot of different ways to manipulate it to understand how things are really change within that system.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give you guys kind of a story that I've had in my life where we've seen a real life zombie event. So we had a family friend who went down to South America on a service mission, and while he was there, he contracted something, we don't know what, and he lost all of his memories. He became extremely violent and started attacking everybody. And and they couldn't control him. He jumped out of a 3-story window, and he's doing better now. But he had to relearn like how to tie his shoes and everything else. And so this is like, even though we think of zombies like it's probably not going to happen to humans, there are real world examples of inducing zombie-like states in people and in animals that happen. So we're going to talk about that. So one of the earliest mentions of zombies was actually from the Greek culture, and they were pretty terrified of the undead. And they thought that the reason the undead came about was because the spirits of the dead were not able to travel to Hades. And these were usually people who were either murderers or people who had deformed limbs or other types. They didn't look like you, then you were probably going to become an undead, basically. And to prevent the undead from rising, they would dismember the people, burn them, and then weigh down everything that was left with rocks to make sure that they didn't come back up. And this was mostly because the dead would be very jealous of the living. There are some medically documented cases of zombieism. There was a journal article that's peer reviewed. And so what peer reviewed journal articles is that you present your findings and then it's scrutinized by other scientists to make sure that what you're saying is factually correct. And so it's not just someone saying, oh, this is what I found. It's like, it's been highly scrutinized to make sure there's no false information. So the fact that they actually came out with a actual paper that's been scrutinized is pretty cool in my opinion. And they documented 3 cases that they analyzed. The first one was this, I don't speak French, so it's Clairvius Nars, I can't pronounce it. But he died in 1962 and he got super sick, went into a coma, and then died. And his death was documented and everything. And what happened was that 18 years later, he shows up in the village that he used to be at, and everyone's like, wait, where were you? And he said after he died, he was resurrected as a zombie to be a slave on the sugar plantation. And so he was forced to work at the sugar plantation for the last 18 years. And then the other one was from a lady named Fee, and she died, and they buried her with stones. So they took a bunch of rocks and they put them on top of her. And then 3 years later, her daughter saw her in the marketplace, and they were like, "Wait, what? That's my mom." But she died. And when they went there, the burial mound was still intact with all the rocks. And they did genetic testing to make sure that that was her mom, and it was her mom. But she was she wasn't very cognizant. She wasn't able to feed herself or communicate with other people. And then here in the U.S., the government actually has zombie preparedness plans. I don't know if you guys knew that or not. But both the CDC and Homeland Security do zombie outbreak exercises. And the probability of actually having a zombie outbreak is pretty low. They mostly do this to grab the public's attention because if the CDC is doing a zombie outbreak practice, then most people are going to be interested in it. And then the other one is that they're trying to take a very serious event, such as like nuclear fallout or things like that, and make it into a more fun event for people, so it's not as traumatizing for them. So when we were thinking of how to do the zombies, we kind of split it up into 2 different categories. You have your classic zombie that you have, which is dead, slow, stupid, rotting, and kind of catatonic. There's not a whole lot of higher thinking going on. And then there's more of the modern day zombie that we sometimes think about, which is more of a predator, which is alive, fast, smart, enhanced, very aggressive. And so at this stage, what we're going to kind of put up to you guys, we have several different examples that we wanted to talk about, but we're going to let you guys pick, and then we'll go to those areas and see which ones you guys want to talk about. So, is there, yeah?
Parasite.
You want to do the parasite?
Yeah, parasites are so cool.
We go down to parasites. Okay. So within parasites, most of you know, they're little tiny microorganisms that get into your body. Most people think of parasites as like tapeworms and things like that. But their parasites are pretty unique because they have to have a host. Where they have a host, they have to have multiple different hosts in order to complete their cycle. And so the one I'm going to talk about is Leucochloridium. And what it does is it does something called aggressive mimicry. And so it gets into a snail, so it's in a snail. It forces the snail to go out and to the open to get eaten by a bird. And so it takes control of the snail. And then the bird eats it, it grows inside the bird poops it out, and then the snail eats the bird poop, gets infected again, and the cycle just keeps going. What's kind of unique about this one is it does physically control the snail. The snail really doesn't have as much control over its body anymore. It castrates the snail too, so it can't reproduce. So all the energy is put into getting eaten by birds. And so what they found too is that these snails, they're actually a lot faster than normal snails, which you wouldn't like. Snails aren't very fast, and so the numbers don't look as impressive. But they're like 5 times faster than like a normal snail, because all their resources are being put into getting eaten. It causes blindness in a snail, which I'll show here in just a second. Okay, so so on the right here is a picture of a normal snail, and then right here is one that's been infected with a parasite. I'm going to play the video for you really quick because it's actually pretty impressive. And so these snails, and so when we're ranking them, if you look at that ranking list we have, these snails are very much alive. We gave it a high speed score because relative to how it was before, it's a lot faster than it was. It had about the same amount of intelligence as it did before. And then it's a lot more aggressive. So I would give this parasite a predator type classification. And before you get too comfortable, there is a parasite that does infect humans that does not quite a dramatic event, but it does infect humans. And so there's this parasite called Toxoplasma, and it usually goes through a mouse. A mouse gets eaten by the cat, and then through the cat species, it excretes the toxoplasma. It goes back into the mouse, and it keeps going. And one thing that this parasite does is it causes them, just like the snail, it causes the mouse to go out into the open to get eaten by a predator, and in this case, the cat. But what they have found is that in humans who have been, because humans can get this parasite as well, but it's called an end-stage host, and so we're not able to infect other humans with it. But what they have found is that humans who have been infected with this, they're more likely to take risky behavior. So they're more likely to get traffic tickets, like speeding tickets, and get hurt. So it does alter your brain chemistry to do more risks. So that's what we have for the parasite.
Maybe it contributes to cat ladies with lots of cats.
Maybe it does. Maybe there's some truth to the crazy cat lady syndrome. But yeah.
Next one.
What is a prion?
So it's pronounced prion. So we'll move to it and we'll talk exactly what prion is. So prion is called an infectious protein. So proteins make up, a lot of times when you eat protein, you just think, oh, meat. But there's actually a lot of different proteins, and they are essentially workers inside our body, inside systems. And so proteins have a bunch of different functions. And one of the functions of a protein is obviously in your brain. And so this protein is, in its normal state, you have a normal brain. But when it changes, it actually changes the way your brain looks, and obviously it's going to have impacts on your brain. And the weird thing about this is that as proteins change and fold, they're usually really stable. Like, you would not want a protein to kind of misfold, otherwise it's going to have broken system.
Well, I'm gonna answer. So when proteins are folding, it's kind of like origami. Like it's kind of like a flat piece, and then it folds into like this weird shape type thing. So you guys know.
And in order to do the energy to get to that point, it's really hard to then get energy to unfold that to a flat point. And so the things that are interesting about prions is that what they actually do, so you have a normal protein that looks like this, and then a prion that's going to have like a circle. It will touch the other protein and it causes the other protein to unfold and then refold into this shape in protein. So prions are very interesting because it's a protein causing enough energy to reshape another protein. And so what these do is, this is a picture of your brain, so this pink and red. Your brain is supposed to be very spongy, but these spongy, not this spongy, so all these white spots, those are holes in your brain. So there's little holes that become formed inside your brain when you're infected with a prion. And you can imagine that's probably not good for your brain to have holes in it. And so it causes this severe neurodegenerative diseases, and it happens both in animals and in humans. And the first case of prions actually was with a group of people called the Kruger people. So they're a tribe in Africa. So if you're thinking about zombies and you think about eating brains, this is like the perfect concoction, because the reason people got infected with these prions is because they were eating each other's brains. So in the Kuru tribe, it was tradition to eat the deceased person. So in order to keep it in a cycle, to keep the people alive within them, within this tribe, the tradition was to eat the deceased people. And so what ended up happening is that someone at one point contracted a prion disease. So it can be genetic, and so it's just by chance. So a very low chance of this happening. But then once that person died, the tribe all eats that person that's now infected with this protein. So they all ingested that protein, which then started getting them to become sick. Then they died, and then they started getting eaten. So you can think this cycle of like, as more and more people get sick, these prions are eating this more and more. And so this tribe essentially almost got wiped out completely by these prion diseases, by this neurodegenerative disease. In fact, the government had to come in and say, we know this is your cultural tradition, but you have to stop eating people. Like, this is illegal now. They had to create a law to prove that, to try to get these people to break this tradition so that it wasn't being spread throughout them. And so the animals that are affected, have you guys heard of mad cow disease? So mad cow disease is a prion disease. It's creating the cow. The reason it's going mad cow is because the brain is becoming spongy and getting holes in the brain. And then here in Colorado, if you're a very outdoorsy person, you've probably heard of chronic wasting disease, which affects the deer a lot here in Colorado. And it's doing the exact same thing that mad cow disease does to cows. It's just in deer in this case. And so these are just pictures so you can imagine. I couldn't find any pictures of people affected with prions, just mostly their brains. But you can see what ends up happening to your body. You start to waste, so it becomes very weak. They have a very weird staggered stance. Their ability to be cognizant and aware of what's going on around them becomes really low. Alzheimer's is actually a very related disease. So if you can imagine how an Alzheimer patient acts, in the sense that they forget, they're unsure, they start kind of time jumping, and eventually they just start losing their entire memory. That's essentially what's going on with the prion disease. So the same sort of signs and symptoms are going to happen in a prion disease. So in our ranking system, they're going to be more of the classic, because they're obviously degenerating. Their speed, you can imagine that this cow or this deer is going to be able to move very fast, nor is a person who's going to be in this state. Their intelligence is severely limited, so most people will completely lose all their memory and knowledge of everything before they eventually succumb to the disease and die. They're wasting, and then their temperament, they become more docile just as they can't function anymore, so therefore there's really no energy to put into it. Alright, what would you guys like to talk about next?
How do you treat a
You don't.
You
So
don't.
yeah. So it's hard because there's not a lot of research because they're very rare.
Yeah.
There's another one called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and that's the one that predominantly affects people, and it's actually genetic. But even with the genetics, I think it's like 1 in like a million chance of it happening. But there's not like a lot you can do. So
Yeah, I'm just like,
you just always succumb to the
is
disease.
there even a way to like target a misfolded proton? That seems like that would just be insanely difficult.
Yeah, there's research to try to do that. It's just far and few, and I think most of the research goes into Alzheimer. And if we could figure out Alzheimer, then they could start trying to apply that to the prions as well, since they're both classically causing the same effects inside the brain.
Yeah, there's actually a prion disease that happens because of inbreeding with royalty. And so there's a disease that is predominantly for the royalty, called Huntington's disease, and that's because of all the inbreeding that's started to do.
So the story of that is don't inbreed and you won't get,
Or eat brains.
or eat brains, don't eat brains and don't inbreed and you won't get holes in your brain.
Yeah.
My side.
Can we talk about fungus?
Yeah.
Yeah, parasites and fungus are like the two that are like the scariest for zombies.
They're definitely the most,
Oh, that's
they do the most manipulation of their host, for sure. Okay, so I have the fungus slide, so we're gonna talk about this. There's a couple different fungi. There's one that infects ants, that causes ants to do a very similar effect that this is happening. However, like I said, I study fruit flies, so to me it's very interesting to kind of know more about this. But this fungus is called Entomophora muscae. So muscae is a fly, and so this fungus was originally discovered in house flies. However, they know that it affects a wide variety of flies, including fruit flies. But what it does is this fly will be infected by this fungus. It causes them, so in that top left picture, it causes them to go to the top area. They latch onto something very high above, and then it causes their abdomen to swell. So the fungus begins to grow and begins to figure out where the weak spots are within the abdomen of the fly. So it has an exoskeleton, so there's going to still be weak spots though, and it starts stretching it out. And eventually it stretches so much that the fly will explode. And so then it explodes, and all these fungi on these spores will come down and then infect other flies. And so then it just repeats the cycle of these flies continually being infected. And then once the fly explodes, it actually doesn't just disappear. The fungus begins to grow out of it some more, and then that allows it to still remain there. And so if other flies come across that one, they can be infected that way. So it becomes kind of like this dead carcass that's still very infectious. So there's two mechanisms of trying to get other flies infected at that point. So there's not really like signs or symptoms necessarily, so there's just signs of this disease in flies. So the first thing is they have some altered behavior. They're going to be kind of weird. They begin to raise their wings and like vertically as opposed to be laid down on their back. So they can climb up to an area, and that way if your wings are straight up, you can imagine the abdomen's out, so it lets all the fungus be able to spread out as much as possible. And they will do this typically in the morning. So they begin to just climb up, and then they just stay there and become catatonic. And so this are videos of the fruit flies going under this. So the top video, this is just showing a fruit fly. So what it's doing is it's probing with its mouth. So it's just probing on the top of a container, and there's no reason for it to be probing, no reason for it to be kind of kissing essentially, if you can imagine, kissing the top of this container. But the reason it's doing that is because the fungus is actually growing out of its mouth parts, and so the fungus is telling it needs to continue to kiss an area. And so what eventually happens is the fungus can attach to an area, and once it's attached, now the fly can no longer move away. And so, yeah, so you see the bottom, do you see how that fly is struggling to get away? It now knows it's stuck, but it can't do anything about it, because now the fungus has attached itself there. And so this fly is essentially now a prisoner into this idea of wherever it's going to be laid. And eventually it will just succumb to like exhaustion, and then the abdomen will grow out, and then it will explode and kill the fly. So in this case, this is another classic. The fly loses all its intelligence. It shouldn't be doing any things. It should be just kind of going for food and for mating behaviors. It causes it to have no speed because you can imagine it can't move anymore now that it's attached by its mouth parts. And then it doesn't have any sort of aggressive behavior to other flies. It just moves away on its own. And then, like I said, there's a similar one that's in ants, and instead of just kind of having mouth parts, the fungus causes the ant to actually pinch down with its mouth parts, and then a lock, kind of like a locked jaw, and then it just holds itself there until it explodes and the fungus spreads over to infect more ants.
I just want to say it would be a cool movie if the zombies exploded and infected.
Yeah, I don't know, like, how many of you guys ever watched, or ever played the game Left 4 Dead? Yeah, so like the boomers, I think is what they're called. Like they hurt you with acid and stuff, but it'd be like a very similar effect, like they're swollen and then they like explode and then you get infected with something. But
That's scary.
what next microorganism?
So I didn't. So this isn't really traditionally a microbiology thing, but you can't really talk about zombies without going back to the original zombie and how they were born. So they're down in the Caribbean. There's these priests called the Boker priests, and they used to make slaves using a special concoction of toxins that they would use. So the first thing they would do is they would put the human in kind of like a comatose state, and they would use things like human bones, and then like tarantulas and millipedes and frogs and sea snakes. But the important thing that they would use is pufferfish. And if you know anything about pufferfish, pufferfish have a neurotoxin in them. And the neurotoxin is used a lot in research laboratories to inhibit certain parts of the brain. And it's maybe part of the reason why a lot of the people who are exposed to this concoction of poisons are very susceptible to suggestions. And after they kind of go into this comatose state, they're then administered a psychedelic drug from Jimson. And so these people aren't really with it at all when they get it. And these were kind of the first depictions of the zombies. And what kind of happens after you're exposed to this treatment is you experience a lot of memory loss, you're easily suggestible, you experience a lot of delirium and disorientation. You don't really know where you're at all. You're very much alive, but everything else is pretty much you're not. It's pretty much classic zombie. This when the first movies came out in like the 60s. This is what they were basing it off of, and so this is hands down the classic zombie.
Is that reversible?
It's reversible over time. So a lot of times they would. So this the neurotoxic it blocks the sodium channels within the brain, and so one of the cures is that they'll give people a lot of salt to try to restore those sodium channels. I think we just have bacteria and viruses left. Alright, do you guys have a preference for virus or bacteria? Bacteria? So this is my field. This is what I do research on every day, mostly is bacteria, and I work with Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And while we were preparing for this talk, bacteria are like the least zombie-inducing organisms out there. But there are a couple of them that do, they produce zombie-like outward appearances in people. And so, one thing about Mycobacterium tuberculosis is it's an extremely old disease. We don't hear about it much in the States because most people here don't have it, but it's been with humankind for millions of years. And you can actually track human migrations by looking at the type of tuberculosis they have. It's been with us for such a long time. In the 1800s, 1 in 7 people would die of tuberculosis. It was a very big killer. And even today, it's the #1 death by infectious organism in the world, with 1/3 of the world's population currently having tuberculosis. Not here in the States as much, but as soon as you step out, you run into it more often. Currently, the last statistic is that there's about 1.6 million people die a year from it. And what people used to think with this disease was that it was the idea behind vampirism. And I'll show you a picture why, and kind of talk about some of the symptoms. So when you get tuberculosis, you basically start to waste away, and you start coughing up lots of blood. And what happens is that tuberculosis is primarily a lung disease, and fall apart, and then you have all these huge holes in your lungs. And so when you're coughing up that blood, you're actually coughing up pieces of your lung. And these people they have no energy, they don't want to eat at all, they get a lot of fever, and it used to be called the white plague because these people would just lose all their color in their skin. This, what I would say, is very much a classical type because these people can't move around and stuff very much, and it's still a very big problem nowadays today too. There's a lot of Bill Gates donated a ton of his fortune actually to try to eradicate tuberculosis because it's just devastating a lot of these underdeveloped countries. I guess we'll just go on the viruses. We have that?
So virus is my expertise. So I have a couple different names for different viruses. The first one is this tree-top disease. So this is a baculovirus. Baculovirus infects different types of insects, and specifically this one infects caterpillars or larvae of moths. And so what it does is apparently there's a lot of the insects, they just go to the very top. So it causes this caterpillar to go to the top of an area and then just become very still and just basically it eventually dies. And so the virus encodes a protein that is an enzyme, which means it'll help break down stuff. And so what ends up happening is these caterpillars literally begin to melt. And so as they melt, drops of them are dropping down into like the other like parts of the canopy or onto the floor. And so then other caterpillars will then be able to basically like have the goop fall on them and become infected with this virus, and then that causes them to climb back up. So this is just another melting caterpillar essentially. So they just kind of again they become paralyzed and then they just melt, and then that's how it spreads itself between the different types of caterpillar. So this is a very classic disease. Oh, I forgot, they also eat a lot. They become really fat because you can imagine if you have a lot of nutrients, you're going to have a lot bigger like size. And so they think as they eat a lot, it causes them to like start the development a little bit quicker. And so that way they become as big of a caterpillar as possible. So that when they melt, you can imagine more chunks being a bigger caterpillar. The next one that I covered is rabies virus. So rabies virus, oftentimes we think of animals, we think of like raccoons or maybe you think of cats and dogs. Old Yeller, that was rabies virus that unfortunately Old Yeller succumbed to. So rabies virus is a virus, and I think it's really cool because the shape of the virus is bullet shaped, and so it shoots up your nervous system really, really, really slowly. So it actually takes a long time before this disease begins to get up to your brain and affect your nervous system. But so wherever your bite is from another animal, which is typically how it's spread through saliva, that's kind of like your prediction of how long you have to live. So if like you get bit on the ankle area, you now have to move all the way from the ankle to your brain. But let's say if you get like bit on the face or the neck, now you have like a lot shorter period of time before it gets to the brain. And so what this does is it causes you to have neurological symptoms and you can have tremors, and obviously, as you can imagine with animals, same thing happens to people. They become very aggressive. And that's because the brain is changing its behavior, the virus is doing it, so that it can spread because it needs to have saliva spread. And so people will actually begin to bite and scratch other people if they have rabies virus to try to spread it out. So in the sense of zombies, this is a case that really changes a person's behavior and how you would think of a zombie running and like biting someone to spread the disease. This is the zombie-esque disease in that case. And it's pretty much fatal in all cases. There's only been 14 cases of this actually being resolved and someone clearing this infection. And most times you actually have to put the person in a coma, so a medically induced coma, and somehow that, they're not sure, there's not like a lot of research on it, but somehow that clears the infection because the brain being shut down somehow limits the infection within the brain. So what ends up happening is you have aggressiveness, these people are hallucinating, so they're seeing your dreams. Another interesting thing about rabies virus is it causes you to be afraid of water. Because of their tremors and like their muscle spasms, it actually makes it really hard for them to drink water, and they can drown oftentimes on the water, and so they're afraid of water. but then eventually you have to just tie down the people and they're essentially just begin to spasm out and eventually will die. And at the very end, it's kind of hard to put the scale because near the end, their speed decreases in the sense that like they're locked down, they're tremoring too much that they can't actually get around the roof. But before it's kind of equal, so that's why I put the speed as about being 4. But the biggest thing about this is that your temperament becomes very aggressive, so it's very predator-like. So when people imagine how would you create a zombie apocalypse, many people say you would create rabies virus-like virus, so taking that idea like saliva spread. But then because rabies takes too long to get into a host, it can take weeks to months before you start showing signs and symptoms. And it's not very common to be spread between people. They said you have to some sort of hybridizing, so creating your own virus with something like influenza virus, which is very easy. So the flu, like you cough, and it's very, very contagious. And so you want some sort of mixture where like it can be spread between 2 different mechanisms, whether it's biting or just breathing in the aerosols. And then I just wanted to put some like additional zombie-like features that viruses have. So I don't know how many of you guys watch The Walking Dead. I'm assuming most of us have, since we're in zombie thing. If you haven't, spoiler alert, a couple years if you're wanting to watch this. But the idea in The Walking Dead is that all people are already infected with the disease, with the zombie disease, called virus, whatever is causing the zombieism. And it's only once you die or you're bitten that it emerges and they become a zombie. And so these features are very possible within viruses. So when you get chickenpox, you have chickenpox, and then later in your life, so then after it clears, it actually hides away in your cells, and then later stressors can cause it to actually reemerge, and then you get shingles. And so I don't know if anyone has shingles, it's very painful, and it appears, it like goes across your body. But that's one example. Another closely related virus are cold sores. So if you suffer from cold sores, they come and go. They come because your body is stressed out enough that the virus actually thinks that the body is dying. That's the reason why it gets stressed out, because it wants to spread one last time before its host dies. And then it realizes you're not actually going to die, and then it goes away. So your body clears the infection. Another interesting thing is that some viruses can integrate with your genome, so they actually put themselves into your genome. And so HIV is one of these viruses. That's why it makes it so hard to get rid of HIV and why the cure is such a challenge, because it integrates into the cells. And so it's hard to, how do you then go in and cut out the virus from all these cells? And so that's one issue. But then when you think of who we are, about 8% of our genome is actually virus derived. So viruses over time, as we've evolved as humans, these viruses have integrated at various points in our life, and therefore has accumulated to a point that 8% of us is virus. So maybe one of these viruses are actually zombieism, and there's something that has yet to trigger it, and we're all already infected and possibly become zombies if one of these viruses is the case.
Yeah, so I guess we'll kind of leave it up for questions. If you guys have any other because we kind of took this as kind of like an introduction to microbiology, because we covered all the main core areas of microbiology, like virus, bacteria, prions, and things to try to teach you guys about. But if you guys have any more questions or anything, we'd be happy to answer them. Yeah.
So, what do you think about the link between toxoplasmosis and schizophrenia in humans? Or the possible link?
I don't know if there's a link. I'm not really sure, because you can. So once you get toxoplasmosis, you can take certain drugs that will clear your infection.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's lasting neurological implications of toxoplasmosis.
Well, except they showed that you were more likely to take risks.
Yeah, I mean, like once you're cured, I don't think I've seen. Although I have heard something about schizophrenia and toxoplasmosis before, and I don't remember what it was.
Right.
I imagine like if you were not treated soon enough after getting toxoplasmosis, there's a possibility that like there's long-term brain damage, and perhaps that could lead to schizophrenia because you're messing up different connections within the brain, within the neurons, and maybe that possibly could lead to schizophrenia. Because now, even though you don't have the parasite anymore, you're still likely to take risky behaviors or kind of have an altered brain chemistry.
Do you know why toxoplasmosis causes miscarriage? Do you know why?
It can cross the placenta, And so your placenta is usually like, it's like this very protective thing. And so microbes that can cross the placenta are very dangerous. And then because it enters them, it's a developing organism, and so it's not, like it has no immune system, there's no way for it to fight off, and so therefore it's just going to overcome the fetus or the baby.
Yeah, because the fetus, the mother, like the fetus and the mother, it's always monitoring it, and if it detects any abnormalities and stuff, it's going to, oh, this is a rat.
I think it's most likely
Most likely microorganism.
most likely out of bacteria, toxins, and fungus.
I would say the easiest one for humans would be viruses.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would lean towards viruses.
Like the cold.
Yeah, like, I mean, if something happened, like some sort of like root virus like emerged, and it can spread really easily and quickly, and cause these things, then that's what kind of causes like pandemics. Like if you think of like the 1918 flu pandemic, like it just went across the world so quickly, causing so many people wiped out. And I think that's the thing with viruses, is like how quickly can it, or how easily is it transmitted? So.
Well, and I think also too, viruses, like, because we have technology now, where it's called CRISPR, where you can go through and you can create your own, like literally piece by piece change the genome. And so viruses would be a very easy way to do that. Like if you're trying to do like a parasites or a fungus, like there's so many other, like you have to worry about like organelles and everything else and making sure it's not toxic to that. But the viruses would just be very easy to be like, oh, we're just going to insert all these things, and take this out, put this in. And so it'd just be a ton easier to do that way. So genetically engineered.
We have, if you think of our genome, there are bases, it's like the pieces, we have like A, T, C, and G, and in those, there's, it's like giga bases, right? So like, giga is 1,000 times bigger than a million, and so then viruses only have kilobase amount, so only thousands, like those pieces together to be like at its full form. So it's also easier to build it because you don't have to worry about a couple thousand pieces as opposed to hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
So you think it's with CRISPR currently today with that technology, can you get an HIV virus, put rabies in it, and release it? Is it possible to convert those two together right now?
Right now, I would say it's probably not likely. So viruses are very interesting in that they have like a lot of different systems. So like their genomes actually have different ways. So some of them have RNA, some of them have DNA. So HIV goes from RNA to DNA, and that's how it can integrate into your system. And the way rabies virus is actually RNA, but it's flipped in the opposite direction than you would imagine. So to try to combine those two would be difficult, just because they're in like, the genome structure is so different. But influenza, for example, has that same like flipped system in the genome structure, so it'd probably be easier to like rabies virus with influenza together, just because of like the system. But
that can be done today with the CRISPR.
It's very possible to, like, you can create it. Whether or not that means it's actually going to
be infectious,
like be able to be infectious, that's going to be a different story.
And I don't think it would anybody would get funding or like grants any efficacy boards to like do that kind of research.
And there's actually like, so a lot of people like, you probably have to buy that like those pieces, and the government regulates what you're buying. So if they see it like an infectious organism or agent, they actually email you and they're like, we see that you're buying this. Why are you doing this? So you have to have like paperwork to prove like my research lab looks at influenza, therefore that's why I'm buying it.
Yeah.
So, you guys ready to?
Is that regulated in other countries as tightly though?
Some countries, I think some countries is not as tightly regulated, but then the one issue is become where your resources in those countries, and they're going to be far and few. So like to have the resources to create that, you need to be in more like a Western country where it's going to have more resources at hand, and those ones are going to be more tightly regulated.
And biological warfare is one of the few things that most countries are pretty big in agreement with. So like I think it's only like Russia and the US has still has things of smallpox, and they monitor each other very closely to make sure that one or the other is not going to weaponize it. They mostly keep it aside for research purposes. It's like the line that nobody is willing to cross. It just get out of control so quickly.
I think that would be the fastest way to spread
Ooh, a zombie.
Sand.
You already knew about the caterpillar?
I was trying to see if Victoria could tell if the tuna covers the shorts or
so people can come out.
Let's go to this one. See if we can find Mom. Hey, hello there.
What's up?
Getting legend. Don't worry about it.
It's a little more open area and see if we can get a hold of Ron.
video game lounge.
Still there?
The only issue I think I'm gonna have here is to walking up the stairs.
What are we going on? He's not.
Some of my animated issues I have is like it's falling backwards, so it's probably the problem.
Is he still waving? Yes. Well, I made him.
It seems like it's alright though.
Like when I was setting down like the armor, like I scrunched it together, so I was having to pull it apart.
I do in fact want
No,
another.
I'm waiting on to see if Mom answers me.
Hey, there's the guy who brought the Steve head.
Yeah. Look what they got Steve here.
And then the random Hello Kitty backpack there.
Are you ready to start? I wonder if I shouldn't take what is it? I was just thinking cape. It's kind of the only way to do it would be to run the buckle
Where are we
through
going? What are we doing now?
cape so the cape will be unaffected by it. 'Cause right now it's like it's holding down.
What are we doing? What are we gonna do?
I could do that though.
What are we gonna do?
Hold this one or somebody if you got the ability. Let me see the front.
Like you actually need to show Star-Lord. Sorry, I'm gonna go around and like shout for it. Oh!
You got a message.
What's she saying?
In room with booths.
Hi, how are you?
To the right. Cool costume.
It does have. It looks good. Okay, right there. Stand over, look, give them room to move. The whole idea is that we're out of the way. Okay. You want to go walk around up there a little bit, or do we have something else that we're going to
Do y'all want to do Disney Magic?
I want to go walk around.
Okay. Do you want to? Does anybody want to do Disney Magic? Hold on, I'll show you in a minute.
I don't want to do anything. I want to go look around.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to go do Disney Magic with me?
No, I want to go walk around and look at.
Okay. Then y'all can go look.
Yay.
We'll get it in a
do?
minute.
Yeah, let's stay up against this thing.
Yeah. Probably trying to move Victoria.
I'm trying to get to Daddy for a second. Switch me places. I'm working my way. How was it? Interesting? Yeah.
Huh?
Was it interesting?
Yeah, it was actually of you. It was basically some actual scientists that work with microorganisms and bacteria and stuff.
Okay.
That they were going over this, like the six different ways that zombification can happen in real life.
Okay.
Nothing for humans, but you know, we did get into some of the aspects of if it could happen, this is probably the way that it would probably transmit.
Okay. Like a cross between rabies and the flu.
Yeah, I was gonna say legit. So, do you want cash or do you just want to name your card?
Do what?
Stop being name your card.
I got my card, but
Stop being fake.
That's okay. Most of them take the card.
most of them, yeah, I think they all have it.
Or I'm not the only dipper. I found a couple of the person who passed by who's also just like, there are two people who pass by and they're dressed up as Dipper and Mabel.
Oh yeah, that's good.
That's sweet.
I'm gonna keep it.
Oh, ponies.
There's Victoria. There's some
They say they got the brick wall over there.
You do reenactment? I did SCA for 15, 20 years. You live.
I ain't gonna lie.
You actually, I get 2 shots. Okay, I get your scutum up before I can see it.
Oh, let's get them. Your shield.
Do I get points for knowing what it's called?
Yeah.
Well, that's his gladius, and that's a Loricus segmentata.
Exactly.
And he's a centurion because it's cross, right?
Yes.
I'm a game designer, so this kind of stuff I research all the time.
We're working on Lorica Hamada, but we haven't got that far yet. He likes this so far, so.
And then you got the squamata, which is the scales.
Yes.
By the way, so in case you guys don't know, this is your first example of industrial mass production. The Roman army, a guy pointed out that the Roman army had the technical ability, but not the know-how to make submachine guns. They had, because of how they made their armor and everything else. If they had gotten gunpowder technology from China, which existed, there was a role-playing game, Gun Supplement, where the guy went what ifs, and he had like the idea of Roman soldiers in their armor, but with these primitive,
they did have
basic
the
black powder
scorpions,
submachine guns.
Scorpion.
Well, that was firing crossbow
crossbows,
bolts, yeah. Mangles and scorpions.
Imagine they have the gunpowder.
You see the movie Gladiator?
Yes.
I mean, that's actually how they fought. Too. That's how they won, because they had that whole unit up, and they understood combined arms for everybody else.
The shield wall was impenetrable almost, so.
Yeah, but what is it? Well, they didn't do flanks. That was outdated by now. Because that was at the Greeks. The Macedonians using shields like that, and big long spears.
Yep.
And your spear, by the way, is
Adam Silfen, can you go to the defender
so I throw it into a
Salty
guy's shield
Dog?
and it sticks and bends, and
Thank
now he's
you,
dragging
Adam
4 or 6
Silfen.
pounds of spear.
Immediately, thanks.
That's like tough for everybody.
Plus, it had soft lead for the long shaft with a hardened metal tip, so if it hit, it would bend immediately, and you couldn't throw it back at the person that threw it. That was always some of the coolest
The sword was meant because you just got in real close and just started cutting it.
I would have brought it, but I don't think they would have.
Yeah,
You probably can't have a steel.
he has a true gladius at home.
Prepared for battle. Like we all walk in with the training swords, then you have the gladiator.
I feel like the armor's kind of bunched up on the right side.
You probably better. Well, you can go to them. I just know that we want to stay together. You're free to do that.
I'm probably gonna.
Okay. I mean, if you want to break off, put your down right now.
We need to go hit the pond and see what all's out here, if there's anything new.
There's a good chance we are not going to stay together. So as long as you got the 3 bigger people.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty good. What time's our next one?
I don't know. I was going to do.
I'm gonna press the armor. What's
wrong?
It's not like cleaning my armor. I have it right now.
What do you need to do?
I'm trying to press it closer to my body.
It's hard to tie tight, but you're up there, you're tight.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's alright.
Basically,
What's wrong?
to the Disney metric, which is 12 o'clock lunch, and 1 o'clock is astronomy stuff. So maybe about an hour we can have lunch. We're not doing it. No, we're not doing it. We're gonna walk around.
Basically doing lunch.
So let's walk around and then we can, in about an hour we can do lunch.
There was Alex. Did you see Alex?
Yeah, they're going. Go. What? Come here. Here and Sam, go down.
Yeah, go say hi, Casey.
How are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Doing good. How are you doing? How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for asking. Are you having a good time?
Yeah.
Hi, are you having fun? Yeah.
The Walking Dead game with Telltale. Logan. It's fantastic.
Well, they made a game of Jaws.
Huh. I don't know how you do that.
I know. Do you just try to survive the Like, that's the whole point of the game. Just try to survive.
Just stay on land. Then you run against the shark.
Turns out there's just a random shark inside.
I actually found a dress at Denver Comic Con that has the black with pockets and oh my god, I was looking for a costume, but like I tried to order from Amazon or Etsy. I said, I want to try it on. Denver Comic Con, there was a place that had 3/4 and it was yellow, and I went, it's my size and it has pockets, and I was like, I can try it. So much weird.
just started walking into a fire pit.
A bunch of Minecraft ones.
Well, her should be that on Song Chain. I'm pretty sure he.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure.
How much are these? All the prices are on the back of them. They're kind of individually priced for which ones they are.
This dinner is revolting.
I mean, it's, if you got a kid, it's great.
Oh, I love that you got Rocket on your back. That's so cute. No way. You guys look awesome.
Thank you.
Wow. How did you guys think that up? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'll do that.
Love it. You look good too.
I'm gonna snag a picture real quick.
I will photocopy the picture.